Welcome back to the Charismatic Voice, where 3,000 Ave Marias is not enough. That's right, the prayer Ave Maria has been set to music over 3,000 times throughout history. And today we're going to be listening to one of the more recent settings composed by Igor Krutoy and performed at the grand closing ceremony of the New Wave 2021 competition by Dimash Kudaibergen. Let's get to it. Those are cool sounds. Huh. Just immediate shivers. This beautiful intro, I feel, is so angelic and such a pure yet tender and vulnerable sound coming from Dimash. I love the amount of airiness that he has in the sound, especially for that kind of high note. It has a mixture of sounding like a countertenor, classical countertenor, of course, but at the same time, he's adding a lot more air into it, which sounds a little more like it's pulling a little more of a pop element into the sound. And some countertenors today do have more air, but they'll usually have a little more power that will be accompanied by that air. And the way that he's just very thinly singing on the edge, it sounds like he's perfectly catching the air when it comes up. And right before, it hits the vocal folds, you can hear that he's just perfectly catching that air instead of having a big gust ahead of time or something like that. That moment is the onset, when the vocal folds start going wacka, 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 perfectly timed with the air coming through. And he does that so very beautifully. But let's talk also about that intro. It sounded like somebody was having a ton of fun with the sound design. I was trying to place all of the sounds here and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I thought it was it added to a lot of ambiance to the piece for sure. But I'm going to go back and see if we can't talk about some of those individual sounds, because somebody took the time to think, oh, I want this kind of specific sound to set the stage for this. This is a really good idea for, percolating the audience's ears. What are we going to do? So let's go back to the beginning and start again. So that almost sounds like it's like a combination of a rain stick and some strings. Of course, you have a lower string underneath that is just held. It's creating this sort of string bass. Um, has a little bit of ominous nature to it, right? There's a certain tension that's created when you hear a low string held like that for a long period of time. But this sort of bouncy sound on top, um, it could be created by software, could be synthesized. There's some amazing modeling software out there now that can create some really fantastic sounds. I love in Logic Pro, there's a specific one called Sculpture, where you get to pick the different kinds of material that your instrument is made out of, and or like what combination of material and where you would want to put the pickups for that. It's just amazing. Okay, so if you're into sound design, check out Sculpture and Logic Pro. But here, I also wonder if they might have done something maybe with a prepared piano where they put something in the strings. I'm not sure. It's a really, really fun sound though. That sounds like percussion, of course, like on the side of a drum, and then you got sticks maybe. And then this heartbeat combined with that lower string. That string might also be a string synthesizer. And the heartbeat, yeah, those two together, tons of anticipation. When I go back and listen to this again, there's a few things in here that Dimash does in an amazing, amazing way. And I feel like a lot of times, if you're just listening to this, you think, oh, it's beautiful, and you might take for granted all of the incredible things that he's doing here. If you've ever been nervous, you know that the voice tends to be a little shaky. And you know, when you get up for his speech and you feel that wavering, and just imagine singing, many of you probably have, and you feel that the voice is more difficult to control. Starting the beginning of a piece is often one of the most difficult moments. Getting the nerves past that point is particularly hard. So think about starting a piece a cappella with nothing else there, just your voice. Now, think about trying to keep the voice steady while all of those nerves might be going. He is so pro at performing at this point. I don't know if he has any nerves at that point or if he just really knows how to calm them. A lot of performers will still have a tiny bit of nerves, but have found a way to work through them. So the steadiness I hear in his tone is one of the things that inspires me and makes me go, wow. There's steadiness sometimes when he's just holding it straight, but there's also a steadiness in the vibrato, which can become a little irregular with nerves too. So that's one of the really cool things. And then listening to when he does straighten it and when he brings in vibrato is fascinating. Here he looks like he's about to sing. Oh, good. One of the other things I love in there is that he straightens the vibrato out when he's leaning into a note. This is something that it's a particular kind of style. It's subtle again, but it can create a stronger sense of leaning. So one more time, I'm going to go back here. Oh, so gorgeous. There again, I think. Oops, back a little further. Beautiful start. Leans. Leans. I like the brightening of the vowel there too. And leans there again. change. It was very satisfying. And shout out also to Igor Krutoy. He just is a wonderful composer, I think, for Dimash's voice. You often find combinations of great singers and great composers throughout history. And here you essentially have somebody who understands Dimash's voice and how to highlight it. He's essentially started a little lower in Dimash's upper register for that first part. It will have a little more vulnerability in the tone there and a certain softness to it as well. And then moving it up, it will naturally increase some of the strength that we start to hear. Of course, Dimash is a very, very talented, not just talented, I would say dedicated, very accomplished vocalist, excellent technique, so he could choose to do whatever he wants. But Igor Krutoy makes some of those things easier just because he knows how to write for Dimash's voice. I loved the way that Dimash is phrasing here, choosing sometimes to carry a phrase through without taking a breath. That kind of really long phrasing is something I love from classical music. We still hear it in a lot of music today too, but I feel like it just keeps me engaged the whole time. It's beautiful. Let's go back a little bit. I don't think he's doing this intentionally. Dimash always is really has beautiful hand motions to accompany his singing in his arms. But one of the things I'm watching and noticing is that when he's going up for high notes, the arms tend to come out more. And it's not just hands going up, but it's actually an extension of the arms out. When that happens, the rib cage is naturally going to expand. You guys have heard me talk about this maybe with Bruce Dickinson before, where he puts an arm up when he's singing a high note, right? And so moments like that, when the ribs stay expanded, it allows the air to not want to whoosh out as quickly. And when you're going up for a high note, contrary to what people often initially think, high notes need less air than low notes. They need tons of energy because you're supporting the air down low. But not as much air is going to escape through a really high note as will escape through a low note. So think low note foghorn and high note just really energized. So if your arms do expand this way and your ribs expand, that air doesn't want to go as quickly out, so you won't have this essential smack of air go into your vocal folds for a high note when the high note really doesn't want that smack. It just wants continuity. So let's go back and watch his arms and notice how they're corresponding to those high notes. Now you're never gonna unsee the arm movements in relation to high notes. I bet it's once you see it, it's there. And one other thing I just want to mention is the vowel that he's using. It's an ah vowel. Sometimes he'll add just a teensy bit of nasality into it that can help with the focus too. He's using a more rounded ah vowel. Ah vowels come in lots of different shapes. I know you think it's an ah vowel. Okay, well, ah, right? But if you look at IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, not the beer, the tool for analyzing language pronunciation, you'll see that there's all kinds of different ways to make an ah. You can have an ah where your tongue is really high in the back. Ah, it's almost more like an ah sound, right? Pavarotti uses that kind of ah bunch. Dimash here is using a much more rounded ah, like AW, ah, and even his lips are a little more rounded. But sometimes he'll shift it just a tiny bit, and it's very continuous with very minute shifts. Those minute shifts can help maintain tracking or focus so that the sound is really continuous. It can also freshen up the sound. I mentioned earlier that he did something where he shifted it to be a little bit brighter at one point, so that would have involved probably raising the tongue a little bit, maybe changing the pharyngeal space behind the ah vowel. So it's a note of good technique to have a continuous ah vowel. So he's very aware of what his base ah vowel is, and then the way that he can very minutely, just by a teensy bit, alter it as he's going through. That's also really great. Oh. I'm going to come back and catch this all the way through from a little bit before this again, because I realize there's a really beautiful arc. And I'm guessing he has an amazing entrance right after this. But I needed to talk about the way that in this more dramatic part, he not only has become louder and higher, he's getting ridiculously high at this point for a guy. We will check those notes in a little bit. I just love the way he's elongating that high note and changing up the phrase from a little bit before. I don't know if that was Igor or him. Maybe it was a combination. Often when you're working that closely with somebody, you really come up with those things together. But that was such a great way to take a beautiful, simple, catchy melody and make it bigger. It was fantastic. One other side note, I am surprised that we haven't had any lyrics. And Ave Maria is, it's essentially Catholic prayer, right? And there are lyrics that go with that in Latin. But obviously this is all on ah here. So I wonder at the naming of it, Ave Maria, and maybe just saying all you need for that spiritual moment is to sing on an ah vowel, which I think is a fascinating way of connecting that and setting the lyrics of Ave Maria and, a new way out of 3,000. It's so fascinating to me. So anyhow, we're going to go back and catch this from a little bit earlier here because I feel that build. I feel the way that it needs to carry the energy over. Oh my gosh. The onset talk from earlier, the higher you go, often the more difficult it is to onset. I mean, you've probably experienced this where you go for a high note and you think, okay, the only way I'm going to get this out is if I blast it. That is often a solution that people have. They think, okay, high note's coming up, just going to make this loud. Creating a soft onset on a high note is extremely difficult. And we're going to check out what that high note is too. Oh my gosh, it's a C6. He's singing a high C up there. And he's, ugh, that's so hard. I don't think I've ever heard a man live onset a high C with that amount of clarity and cleanliness. And then he almost does even like a re-nudging. It's not really a re-attack. He like re-nudges it partway through, combined with that super steady tone and vibrato. It's just, that's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Oh, go back further. And it's also held forever. Sorry, that moment when he starts it, it's just so perfect. You hear no extra amount of air. It's just so, it's like threading a needle, but because it's a super high note, it's like the tiniest little hole in the needle possible and the tiniest thread. Like it's so tiny, you can't even really see it to thread it. It's so difficult up there, and he just does it perfectly. Dimash. Wow. Overall impression is that this vocally expresses so much with just one vowel and a relatively simple melody, and rising key signatures that increase the intensity. The naming of it, Ave Maria, is total brilliance that gives it extra layers and depth and denotes a soul that's reaching out. And Dimash's execution is stellar. Overall, and also particularly those high onsets. His final high onset at the end, I think, is the most perfect high onset I have ever heard from a male singer. And that includes Dimash. And I've heard a lot of Dimash sing. You can check out all of the videos that I've done on Dimash over here on this playlist. I've heard him do crazy vocal fireworks. But for me, a perfect high onset like this is more impressive than tons of vocal fireworks. So many, many thanks to Igor and to Dimash for creating wonderful music. And of course, thank you to all of you for recommending this. And I hope I get to see you soon in another video. Bye.